When you move to administering the reading passages, you want to start at least 2 levels from the student's instructional level that they got on the word lists. And so from there you'll go back at least 2, and then you'll need to decide if you're going to have the student read orally or if you're going to have them read silently. For the pre-QRI, we find that it's beneficial for them to read orally, to have students read orally. It informs your picture of them as a reader. You get to hear them reading in a fluid way, and not just words, static words, but you're actually hearing them piece together sentences and paragraphs. And it informs your picture of them as a reader by when you're marking the miscues. You can look at those and decide, what kind of a reader is this, and you can really kind of tailor it to your students. If you're doing a post-QRI, it'll be an option for you to have them read it aloud, and there's a number of reasons why you might have that. If you're helping somebody test and you don't know the student, then it's good to hear them read aloud, just to kind of get in your head a picture of what kind of a reader this is. There's been a lot of research, about 15 years of research of people studying whether when students read orally or silently, how does that affect their comprehension. And the authors of the QRI have concluded that comprehension increases when grades 1st through 5 read a passage aloud orally. 6th grade, there's really no difference. And as you get into the higher levels, 7th grade and above, comprehension increases for those grades when students read silently. So that's something to consider when you're asking your students to read. You might consider their IEPs, what's included in those, if that's the case for your students. You might consider if they're an ELL student, is that going to hinder them or help them? You know your students best, and so you'll want to make those decisions on the spot. And you also can maybe consider your data. What data do you want to gather and collect? If it is a student with an IEP and fluency is part of their goals, maybe you do want them to read aloud, and then it's something that you could include. We recommend for ARI purposes that students read at least 1 passage orally, and if you have other questions or needs, or you're unsure, you can always contact one of us, Jill or Dallas or myself, Caroline, and we'd be happy to discuss your individual situations with you. When you look at the reading, the teacher copy, examiner copy of the reading score sheet, you'll notice they all start with a concept question section. You're going to want to skip this section. This would really activate their prior knowledge, and we see where they're going with this. Like if you look at their reasoning behind including it, it's great, but it's something that we don't want to activate that when we're moving into testing them for our ARI purposes. And so you'll just move on to having them read it aloud, and then as they read their copy, you'll have your copy in front of you, and you'll be marking the miscues. And on page 39 of the book, they give kind of a little section about explaining what are some of the things that you might notice, like does a student substitute a word, or do they omit a word? Maybe they're inserting a word that wasn't there, and sometimes a student will self-correct, and so there's a symbol for that. And then maybe they transpose 2 of the words, that's reversal. So those are some of the common miscues that they've recognized in there, and so you can mark those using their shorthand or whatever system you want. That's not really it doesn't matter how you get it on there as long as you mark it somehow. And then usually when I'm giving the test, I don't score in the box that they give you right away, but I go back and do that later because it's not something that I need to do right at that moment. It's not like, well, if they don't read this, then can we move on? Because we still have to get to the questions and the retelling. So you can certainly fill this box in later, but you don't have to do that on the spot when you're administering that part. One benefit to having your student read the passage aloud is you can kind of see if they have some other decoding issues or other reading difficulties besides comprehension. And so that's really one reason why it's good to have a student read aloud, because sometimes you might have a student read aloud and you'll take a step back and say, whoa, maybe AARI isn't the first thing this kid needs. You know, they can't even read this passage and they're not fluent, or you know, they're having decoding issues. So it's another way for you to kind of decide, is AARI the right spot for this child? After students read the passage, and maybe you're marking miscues, maybe not, then you'll want to go to the retelling, and you'll ask students to cover up the passage, or you can cover it up for them, and you'll ask them to tell you everything they can remember about the passage. And really the only prompts that you should use are tell me more, or can you tell me more about the passage? And then you're going to be scribing and documenting what the student says in the order that they say it. So you can do that a number of ways. You can either like write out word for word what the student is saying as they go, or you can try to mark down. They list the ideas, the main ideas and the details that the authors think were the most salient pieces that the student might pick up on, and you would simply number those. Now, it's really hard to do this like on the spot to like number them for me. Maybe other people can do it fast. But what I tend to do is I tend to write or scribe everything they say, and then I go back and I number them later. And again, that's something that you don't have to really do this and score it on the spot, so it's something you can go back and do after the fact. Another thing you might consider is to record what the student is saying. A lot of times students are talking so fast that you kind of miss this, and as the day goes on, and especially if you're giving QRIs like for a whole day, by the end of the day your brain is fried, and so you might skip it, and so that kind of gives less attention to students, so you might want to record it so that you have that to kind of go back on. I've looked at some text-to-speech apps that would like scribe it for you, and I haven't really found anything that I like. I tried the Dragon dictation. I think like if you have the software, like if you're a special ed teacher, or if you know a special ed teacher and you could ask them, do you have the Dragon dictation, or if a lot of times they have a software that you might be able to borrow, and then you can use it, and then the computer would simply kind of take their dictation down for you to make your life a little bit easier. Go for it. And like I said, the Dragon dictation app that I tried, it was really kind of slow, and so I don't really recommend it, but you can certainly try to look for other apps that are out there. I'm sure there'll be new technology coming up. Now, as you're doing this, it's really interesting to kind of analyze these after you give the pre and the post test, because you can kind of see, maybe you notice that a student is organizing the information using text structures, and that's kind of a cool thing to notice and to kind of to look at when if you want to kind of get into it more at the end. But other than scribing it down for the retelling, that's really mostly what you do with that part. Now there is a new part to QRI 6. If you're new to AARI, then and this is your first year and you have the QRI 6, it's new to you, it's new to everybody. It's called this oral reading prosody scale, and it's a little rubric for scoring after a student reads aloud a passage, if you have them do that. And I don't think it's for all the levels, I think it's just for a certain range of passages. Then you would read the rubric and decide, how did my student read? Did they read in meaningful phrase groups? Was it 3 or 4 word phrases? That kind of thing. And so that's just another piece of information that might be helpful for you. Just getting some information about you as a reader, so that Mrs. McCarthy knows how to best support you this semester. All right? All right, so what we're going to do now is read some passages. You're going to read it out loud, and I'm going to ask you to summarize it, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. Okay. Whenever you're ready.
People lived in different places. Some people lived in a city, others lived in the country. Still, other people live in between the city and the country. They live in suburbs. Why do people live in these different places? People live in the city to be near their jobs. Cities have a lot of factories, schools, and offices. People work in these buildings if people don't want to drive a long trip away to their job, they live in the city. There are many other things to do in the city. Cities have museums and zoos. They also have many movie theaters. People live in the country to be close to their job too. Many people who live in the country are farmers. They plant crops on their land. They may sell their crops or may use them to feed their animals that live on the farm. Farmers raise cows, pigs, and chickens. The main food that these animals eat is grain. There are other things to do in the country. You may find a river to fish in or take walks in the woods. The life in the country is quiet. People live between the country and the city. They live in suburbs. Some people think that people who live in suburbs have the best of both worlds. They live close to their jobs in the city. The suburbs are quieter than the city. They often have many movie theaters too. It doesn't take as long to go to either the city or the country. The suburbs are more crowded than the country, but less crowded than the city. There the people live depends upon what they like most.
Good.
Just one?
Nope. But go ahead and flip the page like you did.
Mm.
And then can you summarize or tell me what you read about?
Yeah, there's two kinds of places you could live. You could live in the country or the city. People that live in the country, they live there because they can be close to their work. Because they have farms and they plant crops and then they can feed their animals too with it, or they sell it, and also you can go do other things. And there are people that live in the city. They are also close to their jobs because there's factories, offices and whatnot, and there's also fun things to do like museums and movie theaters, and some people live in between both on the country and the suburb and the city. The suburbs, because they're close to each of them. The city is more crowded because of all the places out there. People want to get away to the suburbs, be quiet, because it's quieter. But if you want it to be less quiet, you live out in the country. Know it?
All set?
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead and flip back to the passage.
Okay.